All right. Good morning, everyone. It's a beautiful Wednesday morning here in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I'm happy to be part of our Saline Area Chamber of Commerce HR Excellence Series. This morning, we are going to be talking about change management, one of my very, very favorite topics, and something that I think all of us could use a little bit of right now. There's a lot of changes that are going on. It seems like there's been a lot of changes over the last 2 years that we've been dealing with. So we're going to be talking about some tips and tricks with change management, how we adjust our communication styles, craft great communications, and understand a little bit more about what change management actually is. But before we jump into that here today, just to introduce myself, I'm your HR Excellence Facilitator. My name is Julie Miller, and I am a Master Black Belt in Six Sigma, a certified professional coach, and also a change management trainer. So I happen to be your presenter today as well. So you get a double shot of Julie this morning here if you needed a little bit of extra boost in this case. I happen to run all of our HR Excellence series webinars that happen every other month. There'll be another one coming up here in September. We'll talk about that one in a second. But I'm happy to be here to help facilitate all of these great conversations that we're having with all of our Saline Area Chamber members, speaking specifically about HR topics. So just a reminder on who the Saline Area Chamber is, if this happens to be your first time joining us, we really strive to make sure that we've got our membership, businesses, schools, professionals, all levels of the government able to help maintain the Saline area and surrounding communities as an outstanding place to work and live. I know I love living here. I'm actually an Ann Arbor address, but I'm Saline Schools. And when I have my choice, I jump down to Saline in these cases to make sure that I'm supporting my Saline area chamber businesses. We really want to make this environment a great place to do business. And when we talk about the different value propositions that our Saline Area Chamber of Commerce has, there's two of them very specifically that our HR Excellence programs hit that I want to make sure that I highlight here. One is to help grow your business. So we know that a lot of our business members in the Saline Area Chamber are not necessarily that large that have their own huge HR programs. And we want to make sure we're connecting people in these cases to be able to talk about the different HR issues that they're having and to invite people to come in and talk about these very specific HR topics uh, with each other so that we can start to get some of that expertise into play here. And we can talk about those topics that we may not be able to talk about within our own companies because we just don't have that many people sometimes in those cases. That also helps create those partnerships that we have between our businesses as well. So all of us who are here on the webinar here today partner with each other in business. We know who to reach out to when we have questions, and we're creating that collaboration across all of our business members as well. The other one is the professional development component of the Saline Area of Chamber, and that's making sure that we are offering opportunities for all of us from a professional development perspective. And what we mean by that is getting some other expertise out there from speakers, workshops, of the like. And there's plenty of opportunities besides just this HR Excellence program for us to better ourselves and learn more about what's going on in the world, both personally and professionally. There's a lot of really, really great topics out there. So those are the two specifically that HR Excellence really does hit into here. The other reminder I want to give you guys all as well is our People's Choice Awards are going on right now. So please head on over to the Saline Area Chamber page or to their Facebook page. There is a link on there to nominate your favorite Saline area businesses. So please go on there, submit your favorites, and then we'll be voting on those. And hopefully maybe your business will be one of those that are People's Choice for 2021. All right. And what we are doing here for HR Excellence, what our goal is, just as a reminder, is we really want to help all of us stay current on the latest HR issues that we're seeing, training and compliance trends. Obviously, there's been a lot going up and down in the last year that we need to catch up and keep following on. And it is our goal to make sure that we're keeping people up to date and giving them topics that are timely for what they need in these cases. So some of the topics we have already covered, and if you happen to have missed these and you want to go back and catch them, They are also on the YouTube channel, which you're going to be getting a link to today. After you participate in this webinar, I'll be sending you off an email that has a link to that channel where those videos are posted. And we've talked about the COVID-19 records and OSHA requirements for MyOSHA here in Michigan. That was a really interesting topic that we talked about, different changes on where you can get all of that up-to-date information for what we need to do for COVID-19 as well. We had already covered recruiting and onboarding. That was a fantastic webinar we did actually in our last series, talking about, or 2 series ago actually, talking about how we recruit and onboard, how do we keep those employees sticky. One of the most interesting things from that webinar was that over 65% of the workforce will be looking for new jobs in 2021. And that was a big number. That was a surprise to me. So we were talking about how we make our employees a little bit more sticky, how do we onboard them correctly to make sure that we're not turning over as many people, and then how do we hunt down those elusive employees that we are trying to get in these cases. And then actually during our May series, we talked about succession planning, so progression and succession planning. How do you set that up from a very small business to a very large business? Some tips and tricks associated with that. And ensuring that, it does not have to be that difficult. We gave some great templates that are out there, and you can follow up on that webinar as well. And then today we are actually talking about change management, super timely at this point as we are starting to send people back into work. We might be changing or back into the office. We might be changing up some of their routines. People are kind of getting back to normal, and all of that has to deal with change. And our next one that we are going to be looking at here in these September timeframe is going to be the impact of changing marijuana laws. And even when I started researching that one 2-3 months ago, that's all starting to change as well. So I was just reading something this morning. There's obviously more going on with the federal government to legalize marijuana in the entire United States. So that one will probably be changing right up until the day we do that webinar. So we'll be excited to have you in that one as well. There will be a link in the email you get after this webinar here today to sign up for that September webinar as well. All right, so we are going to jump right into change management. And this is one of my very, very favorite topics to talk about. And I got introduced to it actually back in 2008. And it's been kind of a long journey since then. It's completely changed the way that I think about change. And one of the reasons that I jumped into it was the work that I was doing quite often on process improvement and change management. So my normal role is in process improvement. And then I realized every single time you change a process, you are asking people to change. So oftentimes we think about making a change to the process or making a change to the system, and we think, hey, that's all we need to do, no problem. Well, the people can make or break it in these cases. And if we don't put as much effort into the people side of the change as we do as the technology and the processes, we're not going to achieve the goals that we really want to be able to achieve. So when we teach people actually about project management and process improvement, there's always going to be a change management component of it. We cannot forget about that anymore. And there's some really great topics around change management that we're going to talk about here today that will give you enough to be dangerous. And I'll be sending you a couple handouts from today's session as well that can help you out in your change journey. One of the first things we talk about with respect to change management is the fact that change is really a process. It is not flipping a light switch. It's not on or off in these cases. It's not a single event. And sometimes that can be a misconception people have around change, that we roll out whatever a new process is, or we roll out new procedures, we roll out a new standard operating procedure, a new standard work, and we think it's just, okay, they're just going to follow whatever that new process is. Unfortunately, it's not that simple. It's one of those things that has to happen over time. And we all happen to change at a different pace. And it's not just communicating at the very, very end of a process that, hey, this is what's changing. There's a lot of ramp up that actually has to go with it. And the example that I really, really love to use, because a lot of people actually have Costco memberships. Back, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, Costco switched from an American Express card to a Visa card. And that campaign was about 6 to 8 months long that they were doing just to get people to switch from a credit card. And it started off during the November and December timeframe, where they started to have banners across a lot of their kind of ceilings when you walked in the doors. And it was a great time to be able to do it because their traffic is typically busier leading up to the holiday season. That was flashing, hey, we're switching cards in June. This is coming. I believe it was June 16th, if I remember correctly. That was the cutover date. And that is something where you saw the banners go up in November, December. In January, February, you were getting basically handouts and reminders from your cashiers as you were checking out. When we started to get into February, March, April, we had tables set up as you were leaving the Costco warehouse with people who were sitting there with applications for you to fill out for your new credit card. Then they started telling you about all the rewards that were going with it. Like you could not avoid it in these cases. And it wasn't just, hey, we're cutting over June, and then they were telling you that in April. This was 6 to 8 months of really hard work getting people to cut over. So that's why we talk about change being a huge process in these cases and not just that single event or that light switch that flips on. So one of the things I love people to think about is how many changes do you actually have underway? Because one of the things we need to recognize is that change saturation is a real thing. And oftentimes we don't realize how many changes we actually have underway until we sit down and write them down. So one thing I would love for you to do coming from today's session is just take 5 quiet minutes and write down all the changes that are different in your life, maybe in the last 6 months or that are coming up in the next 6 months, and just start writing them down, both personally and professionally. It could be, hey, your kids are going back to school after learning from home for the last year. It could be you might be stepping back into the office from a hybrid model or full time in these cases, or maybe you're starting a new position. It could be, hey, we're changing up your exercise routine, we're changing up our dinner routines, the kids are playing different sports, whatever it is, these are all changes that happen. And we have to take this into consideration when we're working with changes with our employees as well. We don't know everything that's changing in their lives. And what we might think is a small change that we're rolling out could be a gigantic change based on everything else that's going on in their lives. And I share that because I experienced that probably, gosh, it's been over 20 years ago. While I was finishing up my master's degree and my master black belt, I was moving to Michigan in a couple months. My whole life was kind of getting turned upside down. And my friend brought me over dinner one night, and she knew I was really, really busy working on my thesis. And the dinner that she brought me, I had just asked for a cheeseburger, just completely plain. And I opened up the package and there were onions on the cheeseburger. And that change was just enough to kind of send me over the edge, that I had this moment of change saturation where I essentially grabbed onto that cheeseburger and I squeezed it so hard I had little onions sticking out in between my fingers there. And that is something I want you to recognize, that it can be the tiniest little change that you are rolling out, but you don't know everything else that's going on in somebody's life in these cases, especially from an employee perspective. We don't often know what's all going on in their personal lives. So sometimes it can be a little difficult in those cases to recognize that. So know when we are rolling out changes in our work environment, we have got to be cognizant of the fact that there's probably a lot of stuff going on that we don't necessarily know about. So I would really encourage you to just sit down, think about how many changes that you have underway, and then realize that your whole team that you're working with may have that same amount of changes as well. And your employees likely have that many changes too. We're often pretty surprised actually by how much change is underway. Now, this is actually a really interesting study that was done. I use the Prosci best practices that comes out every 2 years, and it's actually set to be published again this year. So I'm anxiously waiting the new best practices. But this was the change saturation feedback that they had received over 2 years ago at this point. So you can imagine this has only gotten more significant over the last few years with everything that we've been dealing with when it relates to COVID and our changes around our workplace and our personal lives as well. And what this does is everybody who has some sort of Prosci change management program and has a train the trainer in-house with them responds to this survey. It's over 1,000 different companies that are responding to these surveys. And 20% of the respondents, and again, this is over 2 years ago, said that their organization is past the point of change saturation. 25% of them said that their organization is at the point of change saturation. So that's 45% of organizations 2 years ago that were at or beyond that point of change saturation, which is absolutely huge in these cases. And it's hard to think about, hey, we're going to roll out more change when somebody is already past that point of change saturation. It really limits the amount of what we can do and how much adoption, how quickly those changes can be adopted as well. Now, that 28%, that next line down, was the organizations that were nearing that point of change saturation. So think about how much they were teeter-tottering already before we've had this wonderful impact of COVID. So in those cases, they might already be at that point or past that point of change saturation. So there is a lot that is already out there. So what do we do with this? There's a lot in these cases where like, there's a lot stacked up against us. So what can we do when we're rolling out these types of changes? Because we know we can't just sit still. We know we still have to make new changes. We know we have to roll out new policies, new procedures. We live in a world of continuous improvement. We live in a world right now where we just have to pivot in these cases to continue to kind of stay afloat. So one of the things that I love to use is what we call our ADKAR model. And this is from Prosci. And there's a lot of really great reading on this. And I can send out with our email today a link to the book that I would recommend reading on ADKAR and Prosci if you are ever interested. It's, I think, about 170 pages. It's called ADKAR by Jeffrey Hyatt, and I will send that out to you as well. And it is a fantastic book that walks you through 5 steps of change. And that is awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement in these cases. And everybody walks through all 5 of these steps as they are going through change. And my favorite example to tell on this, as it relates to how people move through change management, was actually something that I witnessed about 10 years ago at a water park, actually in Scottsdale, Arizona. My husband and I were sitting at a resort in a pool that had a water slide that turned on and off every hour. And sitting next to us in the pool was this gentleman and his young child, probably 4 or 5 years old little boy. And the water slide went on and the horn blows and you can hear the rush of water. And then you can hear the kids screaming like, oh yeah, the water slide went on. And the dad looks down at his kid and he's like, oh, do you see that? The water slide's on. It looks like we can go down the water slide now. You don't have to wait anymore. And that is awareness. You're describing what the change is. Oh, water slides on. This is where you can show the business need for the change. This is why you might need it. Giving people the context around the change in these cases, the risks of not changing, what the business environment is, what our competitors might be doing. That's the awareness side of it. Then you jump into the desire. And this is where the dad, he goes to his kid, look at all the big kids going down the water slide. Do you want to be a big kid and go down the water slide too? And when you're 4 or 5 years old, who does not want to be a big kid in those cases? So the kid's like, yeah, I want to do it. I want to do it. And that's the desire piece. This is the personal reasons that somebody would make a decision to move forward with that change or not. So we have to figure out what are the reasons behind somebody wanting to change. And a lot of times those are personal decisions that people are making. One of the things that I hear quite often, which always makes me cringe, is when I've got leaders out there who are like, well, they get a paycheck. That's enough desire to make them change. Not anymore. Like it doesn't really work that way. They have real reasons where they have choices where they can go work somewhere else. So in these cases, if we are rolling something out, and we have seen this actually quite often right now, where companies are making the decision to pull people back full time, people are making a decision because their desire is not to come back to work full time in the office. They want that hybrid model. So I'm actually working with a client right now who has had and experienced over 20% turnover in the last 2 months just in bringing people back to the office, of people not desiring to do that and then making the choice to go somewhere else. So that desire is actually pretty strong in those cases where you have to make people and understand what their personal decisions are for changing. So in our water slide example, our little kid wanted to be a big kid. So that was his desire and his change point in those cases. Then we jump into knowledge, and that is teaching people how to change. So whether that's training, giving them the education, the skills to be able to follow whatever that new process is. So we're teaching them how to do it. So in our water slide example, the dad goes to the kid, why don't you and I go down first? You can sit on my lap. I'll show you how to do it. We'll do it together so that you can learn how to do it on your own. So they go down the water slide. The dad's got the kid on his lap, and then he holds him up at the end of the water slide to make sure the kid doesn't completely dunk underwater. So he just taught the kid this knowledge on how to perform whatever that new process is. So on our side, when we're rolling out changes to people, we have to figure out what do we need to be able to teach them in order for them to be successful. So what skills do they need? What training do they need in order to be able to follow whatever that new process is? Now we get over to that ability side, and this is where the difference where knowledge is we're teaching them how to do it. Ability is allowing them the safe environment and the time to demonstrate those new skills and behaviors. So we're trusting on what we taught them from the knowledge perspective. Ability is giving them the opportunity to do it on their own in that safe environment. So this is where that kid was like, okay, dad, let's go do it again. And the dad's like, nope, you go do it on your own. I'll be down here. I'll catch you if anything happens. Like, I'll be right here. You'll be just fine. So the kid like reluctantly steps up the top, back up to the top of the water slide, and he goes down completely on his own. But the dad lets the kid dunk at the bottom, which I thought was really funny. So the kid goes completely underwater and he pops back up out of the water. And I don't have kids, but I've got a niece and nephew. And I know with them that when they were little, you had that like half a millisecond when something like that happened to either be like, oh my gosh, are you okay? And then they would burst into tears or be like, yes, that was awesome. And then they would laugh and think that it was absolutely great. So this kid dunks under the water at the very bottom. He pops out. And the dad was like, yes, you did it. That was really, really great. And the kid just squeals with excitement. And that is the reinforcement component of it. And this is one of those things that we don't always do really great at. We roll the change out. We do what I call launch and leave, where we give them the knowledge and then we bounce out. And then we're not there to help reinforce that those changes have stuck. And we expect everything just to change and happen overnight. So that's where we talk a lot about the ability and reinforcement together, where we're allowing that safe environment for them to practice whatever those new changes are. And then we're reinforcing them and continuing to praise them to help make sure that those changes stick. So oftentimes when we see change roll out in, gosh, every company that I've ever worked with and for, we would do a really good job at K. So we do the K of ADKAR. We don't necessarily lay out why the change is happening or make sure that people desire it. We give people the training. We don't necessarily give them a lot of time to learn how to use that process moving forward. And then we leave too early before we're doing that reinforcement. And one of the things that I see quite often is when things aren't going the way that we think that they should go, we just give people more training and more training. And if one thing sticks here today, it's to remember that if people don't have an awareness and a desire around what it is that they need to do and they haven't made that personal decision to change, it does not matter how much training you give them. It won't stick in those cases. If they don't want to do it, then it doesn't matter the knowledge that you're going to be giving them. They've got to make that personal decision to change, which is why from a change management perspective, it's so good to get in there from an awareness and desire and really start setting up those changes way earlier before they actually roll out. So you think back to that Costco example, how they spent 6 to 8 months really getting people hyped up about the new Visa credit card, really putting that sticker out there, how much money you're going to save on rebates with buying your gas on your Costco credit card. So setting up that desire in these cases. So one of the things that we talk about with change management is there are a lot of models out there. So there might be some that you are familiar with as it relates to change management. And one of the other ones that we see quite often out there is Kotter and the 8 steps as it relates to change management and how that relates to ADKAR. And the really cool part about this is they are essentially overlapping in these cases. So in Kotter, their first step is to create And in ADKAR, that is tied right directly with awareness. Same verbiage, same knowledge, very, very similar steps in there. Now, the D in desire for ADKAR actually covers 3 steps within Kotter of building, forming, and enlisting. So you're kind of creating the need for those changes, which really steps into the desire component of this. 5 is actually enable in Kotter, and that is the same as the knowledge aspect that we talk about within ADKAR. 6 is the ability, and that is to generate short-term wins to show people that, yes, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, and you're showcasing the skills that you should showcase. That really aligns really well with our ability phase of ADKAR. And then 7 and 8 is to sustain and institute change. And that really is that reinforcement component of ADKAR. So it doesn't matter what change management philosophy you go after. I know the PMI, the Project Management Institute, has some of their own change components as well. They're all pretty similar in these cases. I happen to default to ADKAR just because I can remember 5 things of ADKAR more than I can remember 8 things of Kotter. I can remember the 5 real easy in these cases. The other thing to think about as it relates to change as well is the change curve, and that we all go from this state of current state, and we are happy with what we're doing in that current state. We have a feeling of routine, even if it isn't great. So sometimes we're like, yeah, it should be easy to change because people don't like the current state, like they don't like the processes that they have. They are still comfortable with it because they know how to work around the problems. So even though we might be making some changes in a process that we know people don't like, there's still going to be some resistance there when we do change, because at least they know how to handle what they don't like in these situations. So it's always important to remember you've got current state, which is comfort, the transition stage, which is that middle period between when we say we're going to make some changes to when we have a steady state of our changes in these cases. That transition state just causes a lot of anxiety and stress, and we are not sure what we're going to do next. There's a lot of things that are unknown. This is that stage where people kind of create their own narrative and their own stories, where it's super important for us as leaders to really lean in and continue to communicate what's going on in those cases, because the more information we give to them, the less they're going to create their own narrative and their own stories in these cases. And then that last stage, when we can finally get there and celebrate, take a little breath, is that future state. And that is something from a reinforcement perspective. We really want to help reinforce that it is a good thing and that behavior is good. And this ties really well with the Kubler Ross change curve. And I just want to walk through this because this one's actually pretty interesting and where we might step out as leaders a little bit too soon. So some of these you might be looking at it going, oh shoot, I actually did that on the last change. And we'll talk about where we can step in a little bit more. So if you were actually to think about what all happened with COVID over the last 18 months, where first we kind of go into that phase of shock, we're like, okay, like I don't understand this. I don't know what to do yet at this point. I might go into denial of, okay, this isn't going to be too long. I can stay in my own house for 2 weeks. It's not going to be very long. It'll be fine. We'll be up at Easter, no problem. And then we get into this phase of acceptance where we're like, all right, we're just gonna dig in. I can do this. We're fine. We're gonna be okay. And then we go into this depression where for us, for me personally, that kind of hit last year on like June, July, August, September, where I'm like, I cannot believe we're still stuck in here. We get this little form of depression. Now, the hard part here that I want to highlight is this level of acceptance. So for some of us as leaders, when we see our people getting to acceptance and that part of change, we have a tendency to step out because we're like, okay, they've accepted this. We're good. We can step away. The hard part with that is that after acceptance, you go into that depression mode. And that's where we as leaders, when we're rolling out change, we have to dig in even further because we know that that roller coaster ride down is just starting. So we need to make sure that we're staying in a little bit more and we're not exiting too early so we can help people through that depression and that experimental phase where people start trying a few things, maybe the last year leaving their house a little bit more. And then once they get to that decision point, once we get through the transition state where they better understand how to perform the change, they've got the knowledge around it and they're starting to execute and they've got the ability to do it, that's where they're making that decision point. So that's where that desire is hitting its full peak, that people are starting to engage. And that's where you want to start the reinforcement. So don't just bounce out when people are starting to accept the change. That's where you dig in even further until they get to that point of making that decision. So it's going to feel like, okay, they're good. I can step out and go do something else now, or I can start on my next project, or we can start on the next change. They're okay. That is just your first indication that they're starting to get there, but it's going to go a little bit downhill from there. So just really, really lean in those cases until they get to that decision point, and we stay there through engagement and reinforcement. So also from the best practices that we talked about earlier from Prosci is the top reasons for resisting change. And they did this both from an employee perspective and from a leader perspective. And I thought this was pretty interesting because there's a couple of on here that I highlighted that showed up both on the employee side and on the leader side. And one of those is lacking awareness of the business need for change. So you have to think here, if our leaders are the ones who are rolling out these changes and they don't understand at the very, very top here what the business need is for the change, they don't have that awareness, how on earth are they going to be able to communicate that to their employees? So if we don't fix that right at the top here of understanding what the business reasons are, we're not setting ourselves up very well there. So this crack that is this big up here in our leadership area, talking about the business need for the change is going to get this big as it goes out to our employees in these cases. So make sure when you are rolling out these changes, all of the leaders who are going to be rolling this out to their employees understand the business needs for those changes. And we've got some examples here on how we can go ahead and tell that story on why we are needing that change. The second one in here that showed up on both sides is the lacking of skills needed to manage the change. So that is one of those things where leaders are like, I'm good technically, I understand the change, I understand the process and the systems. The people are the wild card. And this is always difficult because this requires us to have great relationships with our employees. It requires us to get feedback. It requires us to have some sort of relationship and engagement with our employees so that we know what it is that they need in these cases. And employees were afraid that they lacked the skills needed to change. They weren't sure whether or not they were going to be able to do it. So the more that we can prepare our leaders and giving them the tools that they need to lead the change and to help people understand what the change is, even sending them through the training themselves, the better off we're going to be in supporting our employees in those cases. So getting out there shoulder to shoulder with our teams and showing them how to change in these cases, the better off we are going to be. So really interesting on some of those reasons that we're resisting changes in these cases. So how do we sell this change from an awareness perspective and desire so we can set you up at the very beginning for success when it comes to change? And it's getting you a great advantage here at the very beginning is doing what I call problem statements and objective statements. And I use these quite often when building out charters, whether it's for a project or a continuous improvement event. I do a lot for change as well when we're starting off with communications. So are my favorite problem statements or opportunity statements. It depends on if you've got an existing problem you're dealing with or an opportunity that we're trying to go after that is causing this change. So this problem statement really is telling people why we are doing this now. So you're giving them the awareness as to why we are making the decision. So if we use the example of bringing people back into the office, give them the understanding of why are we making this decision now? What are the benefits to the company? What are the benefits to you personally? What's the risk of not changing in these cases? And putting together the communications around that, making sure that people understand the story behind the decision. Oftentimes when we're creating these change communications, we're doing it because we know and we're involved in the process. We need to remember that not everybody we're communicating this to has been involved in it. So this might be the first time that they're hearing about it. So we have to put ourselves in their shoes and say, okay, I don't know anything about this. Tell me why I need it. So we want to make sure that we're answering the questions here of what are we experiencing right now that's causing us to make this change? What data do we have to support that shows why we need to make this change? How long have we been dealing with this issue or how long has this been an opportunity? So people know it's not just something that is, hey, we made this decision overnight. What is the dollar impact of this opportunity, or how much is it costing us from overtime? How much is it costing us on work-life balance? What is it costing us on bottom line when it comes to dollars? How can we help people understand how big or how small of an impact this actually is? And then what is the risk of us not addressing it? So what is it going to cost us if we don't get on board with this change? What are the risks out there that we might be experiencing it? So that's where I talk about this problem or opportunity statement. A really well written statement here, or just even going through these bullet points, when I read through them, it should make me feel that I understand what the pain is associated with it and why I would want to change. So it's really going to make me want to change that desire as to why I would want to make the changes in these cases. Then we go into that objective statement. And this is really thinking about selling that vision of what future state could look like. Because right now we're in current state, maybe a little bit into that transition state. The objective statement sells us on that future state. And this is talking about the what it could look like. And you're selling that vision. So at a high level, what this change will fix. Now, we are just in that beginning of the communication. We're not telling them exactly how it goes yet. We don't want to get into the knowledge and the ability part of the messaging yet. We just want to talk to them. These are the business reasons why this is what it could look like. Don't you want to live in this world once we are done? So in these cases, that objective statement needs to sell at a high level what you want to fix, what improvement to the metrics you're looking at. So maybe you're looking at overtime or turnover, and you can say like turnover is at 20% right now, and we are implementing these changes so we can get it down to 10%. So you can show people what the impact of these changes are going to be so they can start to picture it in their own mind as to what this vision actually looks like. What's the financial impact of that decision if you happen to know it as well? And then when do we want to have these changes done by? So you can say, hey, we're going to be rolling out these changes. It's going to start here in end of Q3, and we should be wrapped up with these changes by the end of Q4 so that people know about how long they're going to be kind of in this transition state for, so they kind of psych themselves up for it. Okay, I can do this for, X amount of months until we get to this future state. So the more descriptive we can be in problem statement and objective statement, answering these bullet points on these two slides can really help us understand exactly what it is to start crafting that awareness and desire aspect of the communication. The other part of this is a good handout that will be in the PDF copy of the presentation that we're going to be sending out here. And this is something that I like to use with people to understand what the change looks like for each function. Because sometimes when we're rolling out change, we know how it impacts us, but we don't always put ourselves in the shoes of the people that we're changing. And not every function or group is impacted by the change in the same way. So I like using this matrix where we just write down the different functions. This could be different people. If you're in a smaller organization, maybe you only have 5 people, you could write people down the side instead of the functions in these cases, and then write down in that second column there what the change looks like for that specific function or for that specific person. What is going to be the impact to that person of that change? And then there's just some suggestions here of the different types of the components of people's roles at work that may change based on some of the process or system or technology changes that you might be rolling out. So what changes with respect to the processes they run, to the systems they use, to their job roles or job descriptions? Are we asking them to do something different? What changes? Maybe they're reporting to a different person. They might need to learn some new skills or some new tools, some new technology in these cases. What changes with respect to their compensation? Does their work schedule change? Is there a change in autonomy, meaning do they not have choice in what they're doing anymore? Would they have more choice? Do they have to make more decisions in whatever the changes are? And does anything change with respect to their location? So I like to use this almost as a checklist for myself to be able to go through and say, hey, this is what the change is. And these are all the people that we're asking to change, or the groups that we're asking to change. Put yourself in their shoes and start answering these questions, because this is going to help you understand where some of your resistance might be that's popping up, because this will force a discussion on really understanding where those issues might be. So where we're asking people to maybe change a little bit more than other groups, where we might need to spend a little bit more time versus less time if another function really isn't being impacted as much. And that ties in a little bit when we were talking about that there's the same change across the board, but there might be different motivators. Now, when I teach change management classes, I always flash this one up there when we start talking about creating impactful change messages, because this is the same message, but there's different motivators associated with it. And this is where we have to think about it as we are creating these communications, the training programs, when we are rolling out any sort of change, is we often create those communications in the way that we want to be communicated to. We have to think about, I joke, the 7 times 7 different ways of how we are communicating that information out to people. That some people want to see it, some people want to read it, some people want to have a discussion about it, some people we might need to talk with them one-on-one. And they all might have different reasons for wanting that change. So it's not kind of one size fits all in these cases. We have to think about how we are crafting our change communications to be able to kind of customize them for the larger groups of people that we're dealing with. So in that first situation, that buckle up, do it for you, do it for them, that hits the people who are really like kind of family oriented and motivated and would do anything for their kids and their family. They want to make sure that they're coming home safely. The middle one is actually the one that screams to me, the click it or ticket, the minimum of $142, because it's like, shoot, that'd be a really nice pair of shoes I could buy with that $142. Or then we've got the buckle up, it's the law. That's for your rule followers who are like, yep, I need to do that. That's what the law says. So there's different motivators in all of those different situations that we have to be cognizant of. So thinking about how we craft those different communications, which we have a tool for you on that. This will also be coming as part of your PDF presentation here today. I love this matrix for putting together impactful change communications, because sometimes I start writing out a change communication and you open up like an email, you open up a Word document and you just start typing words, and then you're like delete, 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 and then you retype it again and then you're deleting it again. Sitting down and working on this matrix really helps me formulate my thoughts a little bit more when it comes to the different changes that we want to communicate. So we use our kickoff documents, those problem statement and objective statements that we talked a little bit earlier about. And then we fill in what are the benefits of the change. So why would I or we want this for the company or for that function that you're trying to change? And then you're also doing the benefits for the individual. So you're putting together in that column, this is why it's a good thing. This is a good thing for the company. This is a good thing for you personally. Then on the other side of that matrix, you're looking at the risks or the costs or the impact. So what happens if we don't do this? So if we put together our example of returning to work in these cases, whether you're hybrid or coming back full time, or maybe you never left working in it and we're just getting used to that now, you can go through and say, here's the benefits for the company of having people back. Here's the benefits for you as an individual. Then here's what happens if we don't do this. Here are the risks associated if we don't come back, or here are the reasons why people might resist it in these cases, so that you can start crafting your communications around that specific issue, or you can just call it out and say, hey, we know that not everybody wants to come back to the office. And we know people might be very, very comfortable in what they're doing, but here's what's waiting for you when you do come back. Here's why this is a good thing. Here's the things that we're worried about that, if we continue to work remotely 100% of the time, this would be what we're missing out on. So just sit down with a group and have these conversations on what is the benefit and what's the cost and the impact associated with it for the company and for the individual. I love using this matrix quite often. You can do one of these for the entire company, or you could even use the same matrix and fill one out for each function that you might be impacting. So you might have 5 of these if you've got 5 different functions that are going to be asked to change differently, and we might need to communicate something different to each groups in these cases. So really be thoughtful in thinking about those steps of ADKAR, of taking people through awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And don't just jump into the knowledge and the ability aspect of it. Really think through from an awareness and desire perspective to get yourself set up in a situation that everybody wants to change and they're making those personal decisions to change. And then also realizing that not everybody changes at the same pace. So many times when we are rolling out the changes as leaders, We've known about it for 2 or 3 months at this point, or a couple of weeks at this point. We've kicked it around in our own heads. We've had the discussions on the pros and cons with it and talked about different ideas. When we're rolling this out to our employees, this is the first time that they're hearing about it, likely. So we have to give them the same amount of time or a similar amount of time or more information so that they can understand the situation as well, make that personal decision to make the change, and then be able to move forward. And one of my favorite examples of this is I was involved in an organizational restructure once where two of the VPs were combining groups, and they brought all of us together on this half an hour phone call. And it was basically just the first time we were all hearing about it. And it was, here's all the reporting structures that are changing. Here's going to be your new boss. Here's going to be your new job description. This is what's going to change in your pay grades. These are the new companies that you're going to be supporting. And this was all in like a 20-minute time frame that this was all being thrown at us. And albeit virtually, all of us, the employees, were sitting in one room, and our leaders happened to be in an offsite, and they phoned in and were telling us all of this. We're all staring at each other in a room being like, what the heck is going on here? And at the end of the call, the two VPs were like, all right, does anybody have any questions? And it was like whiplash. We were like, wait, what? Like, we don't even know if we want this yet. We don't know why we're doing this. You just dropped a whole bunch of knowledge on us in these cases. So we need a moment to process. And I talked with a couple of the VPs after that, and they were like, yeah, we were really surprised that nobody had questions. And I was like, people had no idea what to do at that point. They were just shell shocked. So I tell you that example because I want you to think about how we could better roll out some of those changes in these situations. What can we do using this matrix to help people from an awareness and desire perspective, get them on board? Once they're on board, then we can give them the tools, the training, the skill set, the ability to be able to do it. Because without that, we're just kind of wasting our time on the knowledge and skill side. So work on awareness and desire first. All right, so I hope that was a good recap on change management. There's so much out there that we could really be talking about. I hope this dove in a little bit into it about the steps of ADKAR, how we can use it from a change management perspective, and hopefully a little way to think about how we dissect change as it relates to what's changing by function and how we can start putting together some more impactful change communications using those matrices. So with that, I will open it up for any questions that you guys might have. And if you don't have them now or you're rewatching this video, feel free to contact me. You can always email me if you have these questions as well. All right, any questions?
Hey, Julie, this is Clint from Toyota. I really like the ADKAR model, and looking back at some of the things we do in retrospect, it's actually opened up why some of the things we do are successful. So like in product development, we actually want to freeze change at a particular time. So after design is complete and we're ready to go into mass production, we want to freeze. But sometimes that can't happen. We have to implement change. So what we do is if that change is a necessity, we look into why it happened, the root cause, and then change our processes with a countermeasure to make sure it doesn't happen again. And by doing that, I've realized with that ADKAR model, that's awareness, desire, and reinforcement. We're telling our staff, hey, look, we really wanted to let you change everything you wanted in your design up until this point. Beyond it, we wanted to stop and get into mass production, but you had to change. So we're going to make sure that that doesn't happen again. And yeah, your model actually made me realize why it actually is successful. So thanks for that.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to hear that because I think in a lot of those changes we make, especially from a process perspective, when I work in a manufacturing environment, a lot of the times the employees feel like things are being done to them. So the more involvement we can get them in on the awareness and the desire aspect of it and be involved in that change and kind of choosing and understanding where they can make the changes and where they can't, A+ on that. So way to go. I love to hear those stories.
Thanks.
Quick thing here, Julie. One of the things that I experienced with the companies I work with, probably the best one at change management was the Toro company. And one of the things that they did, their executive team did a very nice job of of defining what they wanted to do. There was a lot of interaction level at the senior level as to what the changes would be about. And there was good alignment at that level. And then what they did was use an old term that was done by Dean Rusk. Most people don't know who that was, but he was Secretary of Defense. In the 60s, talked about management by objectives, MBOs. And they populated that through the organization, through an MBO process to people's performance. But what they did that I thought was interesting is they talked about and was the forming, storming, norming, preforming stages that people go through in the process of it. So they did a nice job of saying, here's what we want to do, here's the objectives and everything else, bring it down. But they worked on it from that perspective. And the years that I worked for them, every objective that was done in the company or defined by senior management got done. It was the culture was set up where it was saying, all of us are working towards doing this. Now, if I look at other companies I worked for, in one previous company, management would sit there and put their objectives together on it. They would talk about it out to people. And what would happen is people would say, no, I don't want to do this. And so everybody had the right to say no, and it would stop every objective. And it didn't make any difference what level they were in the organization. Very strange to see that. And I'm just wondering if that forming, storming, norming, preforming was really a strategy on the part of Toro Company to talk about, where are you individually within the process of accepting that? And we want to hear you as you go through, and we need feedback. But by able to say to someone in the group, you're still in storming, the rest of us are in preforming, was a very positive aspect, because it told people, accept the change. Accept what's going on. So I don't know, have you seen anything, or are you still, I don't know which model that is for forming, storming, norming, preforming and all, but I can't remember the name of it, but that was part of their normal training every year to all the employees.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting that you brought that up, because I think that ties right into ADKAR as well, on the different steps that you're making. It ties in with Kubler Ross change curve as well. And one of the interesting aspects of this is understanding that not everybody changes at the same pace, and knowing that the same thing when it comes to the different stages of storming, norming, forming, and performing. In these cases, you could have the person next to you is in a different stage than you are, or you might be leading people, and you might have people in all of the different stages of ADKAR or in forming in these cases, that we have to kind of pull people along with us, because if they don't make the step to the next stage, we're going to lose them in those cases. And we have to get everybody moved over in order to achieve the adoption rates we want to achieve, to see the success we want to achieve, the profitabilities, all of that. They need to come with it as well. And if we're allowing people to kind of make their own decisions and check out and space out in those cases, it's really, really difficult to manage resistance.
Yep, absolutely. Very good.
All right. Any other questions or insight examples? Anything you want to share? All right. Well, by all means, if you think of anything afterwards, feel free to give me a shout out, and I will be happy to be able to talk about this. I love talking about change management. We'll get our recording posted up there, and we will get a copy of the presentation out to all of you, along with a couple of the handouts here, hopefully by end of day today. And we hope that you'll join us in September for our webinar talking about the change in marijuana laws and what the impact is on our employees. How do we deal with all of the changes that are going on? So speaking of change management, there's another change we get to deal with. All right, have a great morning and good afternoon for everyone, and enjoy, I'm going to say, the rest of your summer, because the next time we're going to be talking is going to be September. So we will see you all later. And don't forget to vote for your favorite, your People's Choice in Saline. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Julie.
Thanks, Julie.
Thank you.